Excerpt from Scene 1. The Brothers Grimm's study. Lotte and Wilhelm. Lotte is holding a small, homemade frog stuffy.
Hey, Wilhelm, look, I made a frog, see?
A frog? Oh, just like the one in the fairy tale.
Yep, I made it from a piece of my old winter coat.
How nice that you're getting so good at sewing and knitting. Very important skills for a young lady. I can't wait until you can make me a nice new handkerchief or a warm pair of socks.
That's boring. Sock monkeys, maybe. Still, I like my frog better. It's magical. Look, quack, quack, ribbit, ribbit, hop, hop.
Very nice, Lotte, but now is not the time. Jakob and I, we have an important visitor coming. We can't always be playing around, with magical frogs and so on. We must be diligent and work hard as well.
I do. I help Mama with all the cooking and the cleaning and the sewing and the laundry and the gardening, while you and Jakob, you just sit around reading fairy tales all day.
That's our work.
And the rest of the boys, they play with birds, or they go make drawings, or they go for adventures in the woods. I'd like to go on adventures or read fairy tales.
We don't just read them, Lotte, we collect them. Jakob and I work very, very hard. But we only know how to work with words, whereas you can bake delicious cakes and knit pretty scarves. We're lucky to have such a handy little sister, and we love you all the more for it.
Lucky for you, maybe, but not for me.
Being a good housekeeper is a woman's pride and joy. One day, you'll be glad you learned all those fine skills.
I guess, but it's still not fair.
What can I say, my dear Lottchen? Life isn't a fairy tale. But speaking of Mother, she hasn't been feeling well again. Would you mind putting tea and biscuits ready in the front room for our guest?
I already did. She asked me earlier.
Good for you. Thank you. You see, you're going to be a fabulous housekeeper when you grow up. Lucky is the man who gets to marry you.
Hey, Wilhelm, listen, it's Oh Dear Robert. That's a song Dorothy and I always sing.
Nein, that organ grinder again. He's been cranking his organ right under our windows all week long. Such a racket.
I love that street organ.
We have someone coming to tell us a fairy tale, and we need to hear every word clearly so we can write it down accurately. I'd better go and close all the windows.
But Wilhelm! Well, can I at least come and listen to the fairy tale then? I'm bored!
Nein, Lotte, sorry. It's too important a visit. Why don't you ask Mother if you can't help her?
But I've been doing nothing else all day.
You've just been listening to an excerpt from Scene 1 of Kris Fleerackers' puppet play, Little Sister Grimm. This is Writers Radio. I'm Ingrid Rose, your host for our program, also titled Little Sister Grimm. I was lucky enough to catch this show this past summer at Presentation House in North Vancouver. Through his puppets, Kris Fleerackers tells the story of Snow White with a twist at the end. The children were entranced, as were the adults. I was particularly thrilled by his feminist take and his development of Lotte Grimm as the main character, and who most of us will have never heard of.
So, Kris, I really would like to start a little bit with you first, because as a puppeteer, telling stories is very different than a writer telling their stories. And in your bio, you say that you had to learn to get past yourself, that it's less a matter of you telling stories using puppets than of getting puppets to tell stories using you.
I think when you create something, whether it's a theater piece or a novel or a story, you start from yourself. And so always, there's always a connection. I do sit down and write a lot of my stuff. Is that the research brings me close to the characters that I'm working with, whether they're fairy tale characters or historical people like Lotte Grimm. And their lives begin to dictate, of course, what goes into a story to some extent, or to a large extent, actually. But then there's also the material aspects of making puppets, where both in the creation of the puppet and working with the puppet, there is something about it, and it's a process that many artists talk about, where the materiality of it and just working with your hands bypasses your conscious intent. And so I often experience that I set out with an idea of what the puppet should look like or how the puppet should act. And the puppet basically telling me that's not what I want to do, or that's not, basically taking me into a different direction. Because I think if you want to do something that has an impact, you have to get beyond yourself too.
Yeah.
And that's why these characters help.
Feminism for you, where did that start in your life?
Various ways. It started with my mother. She was a feminist, but she was also very much caught in a particular situation because my father was a politician. Political circles were mostly people from the upper classes, high placed, wealthy and all that. So women that could afford to buy fancy gowns and all that, where my mother sat in the, basically in a closet. She had a sewing machine and she would, sew her own gown. She was struggling with that very much. She had her own career as a teacher, high school teacher. But she always sort of felt also in some ways second rate, and then she had to combine the problems of being a mother of 4 children with a husband who was never home, the demands of all the students that she had in school who were teenagers who were often dealing with difficult problems too and all that. And she was also quite a vocal feminist. So she was very much against the patriarchy. She really instilled this idea in me that there should be equality between men and women, that's just a given, and that the world is badly structured in that regard. I became quite intrigued with this girl who suddenly had to become mother of the family, fill large shoes because the mother was so revered. And then the more I started to learn about her, the more I could see that there was this whole world to discover through her eyes, because I became interested, of course, taking Snow White as the core of my story. I became interested in the role of women, the role of girls, the expectations placed upon girls and upon children. I was very curious. I wanted to find something in her own voice. And then I found eventually, after much going down a lot of rabbit holes on the internet, I found an archive in Berlin that had scans of about 10 or 11 of her actual letters in her own hand. I began to see that I'd sort of hit the right mark when I developed Lotte as a character, because I made her somewhat feisty with her own opinions and her own intentions of what she wants to do. A year after the mother dies, Lotte is invited to go visit a friend, and it's actually the elder sister of her best friend, Dorothy, who lived across the street. The eldest sister gets married and she's bored. Well, she's very busy because she has to learn how to do the household and all that. But her husband's away all the time. And so she doesn't know what to do. She feels lonely, I guess. So she invites Lotte to come. And Lotte is only supposed to go for a couple of weeks, but she stays away for 3 months. She doesn't want to come back, basically. So I think she was having a real problem, like an extension. She's only 15, and I think she couldn't handle it. So this was an opportunity. And the other thing is, in those days, the girls didn't travel much at all. Like Lotte, she went away twice, I think, from her hometown. That's it. Never anywhere, and only like a day's ride away. So not much.
So the brothers put pressure on her to come back.
She basically asks Jakob, who's now sort of the head of the family, how long she can still stay with Gretchen in Marburg, in the other town. And Jakob says, well, if you want, you can stay for as long as you want. I'll leave it up to you. So he's actually allowing her agency, which was not all that common in those days. But then when she stretches it to 2.5 months, I think it was that she was away, it starts to get a little bit difficult. So he says like, wow, you're really staying away much longer than I thought you were going to. And, you're going to miss the fair here. You're going to miss all the good times. And it's obvious that it's a burden on them that, there's nobody to take care of them.
You've just heard puppeteer, actor and playwright Kris Fleerackers telling about his surprising discoveries of how the brothers Grimm collected their famous fairy tales. Here's another excerpt from his puppet play, Little Sister Grimm.
Scene 1, the Brothers Grimm study later on. Jakob at his desk in front of a big open book, a quill in an inkwell nearby. Lotte and Jakob. I'm sorry you're bored, Lotte. I wish I could do something with you, but we have an important visitor coming.
I know. Wilhelm said so. Who is it?
It's, Herr Krause. The old soldier. It's really nice of him to come. We desperately need more fairy tales to fill our book so we can get it published. Only they've been so hard to find. Most people think it's silly to come and tell us an old tale about talking animals or a magic fiddle or boots that walk 7 miles with one step. Or they don't remember any. I myself only remember one from when I was little, the one about the fox with 9 tails.
Oh yeah, that one. That's a funny one. But me and the other girls, we tell each other lots of stories all the time. While we do our chores, the maids too.
Yeah, but we don't just want any ordinary story about some baby being baptized or a house burning down somewhere. No, we want the old ones, the special ones, the ones that have been going around for hundreds of years, full of the people's wisdom. But we can't just go around the country knocking on doors everywhere and say, hello, we are the Brothers Grimm. Know any fairy tales from long ago, perhaps?
That would be fun. Knock, knock.
Ach nein, Lotte, not now.
Oh, come on, Jakob. Knock, knock.
All right, then. Hallo, guten Tag. Who is there?
It's Grimm.
Grimm who?
Grimmy, an old story. Get it?
Yeah, I get it. That's good. But what I was saying, Lotte, we simply don't have the money or the time, Wilhelm and I, to travel all over the country. We need to find more people like Herr Krause, who lives right here in the neighborhood and still knows some of the old tales. He's a natural storyteller. In fact, if you're bored, why don't you come and listen?
Nah, Wilhelm said no. And I don't like that sauerkraut guy anyway.
Now, Charlotte. You're being unkind. His name's not sauerkraut, it's Johann Krause, Herr Johann Friedrich Krause.
Well, I call him sauerkraut because he's so sour and crappy all the time. He hates girls.
Well, my dear, Herr Krause is not a happy man. He's had to fight other people's wars all his life. And you know how crazy wars can get. First you fight against Napoleon, and then you have to fight for Napoleon. No wonder he's a bit strange. On top of all that, he's dirt poor. He doesn't even have enough money to buy clothes for himself. That's why today I'll be giving him an old pair of trousers of my own.
Oh, the ones that had a hole in them?
Yeah, those.
Wait, Mama told me to bring them. Here they are. Ha! He's going to look pretty funny in these. Mama used them to teach me how to patch things. I sewed a flower patch over the hole. Look! Sauerkraut! He's going to be a soldier with a flower on his bum. Maybe that will scare Napoleon away.
Ach yeah. If only flowers could stop the French occupation. But I'm sure Herr Krause won't mind a flower. Those trousers will be like new to him. And it's such a nice way for us to thank him. He tells his story so well, they can go straight into our book. Not like that broken fairy tale we heard last week. I don't know how we are going to fix that one.
What do you mean broken? How can a fairy tale be broken? What's wrong with it?
Well, the person who told it to us forgot how it ends. Here it is. I still need to add the title. Schneewittchen. Also called Das Unglückskind. Little Snow White or the Hapless Child.
Little Snow White.
Ja.
Tell us a bit about the early version of Snow White. I was interested. I love the way in the play, I'm not sure now, is it Jakob that's saying it's a broken story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that comes from, I found that was what started the whole thing, is I found a little book, a publication in German by a man named Heinz Rollecke, and he's a Grimm expert. He spent much of his life trying to figure out who the sources were of all these fairy tales, because the Grimm, that's important to know, is they didn't write any of the fairy tales. They wrote them down, they transcribed them. And initially, when they started collecting, they were very rigorous. They wanted the stories to be as close to the oral original as possible. They transcribed fairy tales. They had people come and tell them the stories. That's another thing that's kind of important to know, is that they created this kind of myth that they went around the country listening to, knocking on doors of farmhouses and talking to old ladies who still knew a lot of the old stories. That's all baloney. They never did any of that. They invited people to come to them and invite stories. And a lot of these people were just people from their own circle. So they were middle class, some of them upper class, people who either collected stories for them or came to their house and told them. I was really intrigued that Snow White was one of the, which the Grimm said was one of the most popular tales in their time, still the best known. But in their first form, it's really kind of broken. So they find a version of Snow White that has a completely different ending than the way we know. There's no prince. It's the father who comes back from the war. He finds his daughter in this glass casket next to the dwarf's house in the forest, and he asks his army surgeons to bring her back to life. And they tie a rope around her, and she comes back to life. So Jakob writes in the margin, this can't be the right ending. This doesn't sound right. It must be wrong. It's just not complete or unsatisfactory. He literally writes that in the margin. So that piqued my interest. But at the same time, they found other versions with different endings. There's a version where the dwarves have little magic hammers that they use to wake her up. There's also different beginnings where it's not a king and queen, but it's a count and a countess. But what's also very interesting is that, there's no huntsman either. It's the queen, who is the actual mother of Snow White, not the stepmother, who takes her into the forest and abandons her. That's basically the first version of Snow White that the Grimms heard. So I found that very interesting. So that got me started on the whole research into how they ended up modifying these stories or completing these stories, and what their thoughts process was around these. And then on the other, in terms of content, started me going on the whole question of the evil mother, which is a whole other. That's a theme that really spoke to me in the Snow White story. And so in terms of the form of the fairy tales, the Grimms in the beginning, they remained really loyal to the form. So they had this belief that somehow among all the variants of these different stories that were out there, and they very soon realized that most stories had different variants and different forms, also in different countries often, but they believed that at the source of all these variants, there was one sort of fairy tale.
You're listening to my interview with puppeteer, actor and playwright Kris Fleerackers. We're now going to hear a final excerpt from his puppet play, Little Sister Grimm.
Excerpts from Scene 2, The Castle. Snow White, the King, the Queen, and her magic mirror.
Hello, Mother. How are you? Hi, Dad.
Hello, Snow White. I'm afraid I have some bad news. Word has reached me that the enemy is at the border, so I must go off to war.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Not to worry. Usually it's just a little skirmish here and there, and then afterwards we all go to the inn for pancakes and hot chocolate.
But it's a war. You could get hurt.
I'll be fine. I'm the king, remember? I get to stand at the back while everybody else does the fighting. Besides, I'll be wearing my heavy-duty, bulletproof chainmail and my scariest stretchy tights. One look at me and the enemy will run for the hills, screaming. But I am sad that I'll have to leave you and your mother alone again for a while.
Don't you worry about us, my husband. We'll be just fine without you.
All right then. Goodbye, my queen. Be well. Goodbye, my little Snow White.
Wait, Daddy, I'll come along to the gate to see you off.
All right.
Well, I'm not going to wave him off. I have more important things to do. Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the most beautiful of them all?
You are beautiful, my queen, 'tis true, but 100,000 times more beautiful than you, brighter than the day, gentler than the night, is the one that you call Little Snow White.
What? Snow White? All this time I've been the most beautiful of all women, and now suddenly that little brat is supposed to be more beautiful than me? I should have known better than to wish for a pretty child. This is unacceptable. Something must be done. The sooner the better. Snow White, where are you? Come here this instant.
Yes, Mother, I'm coming. What is it?
Has your father gone?
Yes, he just left with the army.
Good. I was thinking, it's such a nice day. To pass the time, why don't you and I go for a carriage ride together, just the two of us, to the woods?
A ride in the carriage? We haven't done that in such a long time. That would be great.
Let's go then, right now. Come along.
And so the Queen took Snow White for a carriage ride all the way into the deep, dark woods. But then something terrible happens. They're in the woods, in the middle of the woods, and then the Queen stops the carriage and she says, Snow White, do you see those bushes over there? Just behind those, there are some beautiful red roses. Would you be a nice girl and go and pick some of those flowers for your mommy? And Snow White says, Sure, Mom, no problem. And she jumps out of the carriage, but when she gets to the bushes, she doesn't see any roses. And then suddenly, she hears a sound and then, oh no, the carriage, it's riding away. Mother, where are you going? Mommy, don't leave me. But the Queen had left, and the carriage was gone. Snow White was all alone in the deep, dark wood.
But it is important to know that most of the women who contributed stories to the Grimms, to the brothers Grimm, were either already friends of Lotte's or they became friends of hers. So she was part of that whole circle. Originally, I thought I was going to do puppets for adults, but now I feel it's adults and children, and it's something I find important. So both the fairy tales I find are important for this world that we're in, and puppets are important as an antidote to high technology in a way.
That was Kris Fleerackers, sharing his interest in puppets and telling one of the best-known Grimm's fairy tales through puppetry and the eyes of Lotte, the little sister Grimm, title of his play and this writer's radio program. I'm happy to have been your host and want to acknowledge my co-hosts and co-producers, Carol Harmon and Gary Sill, whose original music and technical skills make Writers Radio possible. Thanks to you too, our listeners, for listening.
You have been listening to Writers Radio, a non-commercial collaborative project which presents talented writers reading their own work. These stories, essays, and conversations revisit the long tradition of oral storytelling that connects us to the inspiration behind the words. Be sure to check the website, writersradio.ca, to subscribe to our free notifications list. It's also a way of letting the writers know you are there and appreciating their creative work.
Writers Radio broadcasts from Half Moon Bay on the Sunshine Coast in Canada, traditional tribal land of the Sechelt Nation of the Coast Salish peoples. We express our gratitude for their wisdom teachings and land stewardship.